Who do you know that suffers from lower back pain? A lot of people, right? Hi, I'm Renee Harini. This is the Peoria Professional Show. Each Thursday, I bring you a fascinating guest that you need to know about. And today, my guest is Andy Champion. Andy is a physical therapist and an inventor. He's helping people with his invention solve their lower back issues. So, welcome, Andy.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I think it's so cool that, here you are, helping people. Your day job is as a physical therapist,
Yes,
and you are helping people all day long, but then you saw a problem that wasn't really being addressed.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, absolutely. And so a little bit of backstory on myself. I'm a physical therapist. I graduated in 2007. And been practicing now for 10 years, all in the outpatient setting with a focus on the spine and pelvis. And so that's really where a lot of my energy has always been. And a few years ago, I actually injured my own back.
Okay.
And that's really where the product kind of took off.
Okay.
Because one of the things that we do in the clinic is we'll do basically some manual therapy techniques that allow the patient to get into end range of motion at the spine and at certain levels of the spine. And what I was finding as I was trying to treat myself, because I immediately identified what was going on and immediately went through the whole treatment process, I wasn't able to get better. I got better after maybe 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 80, 75%, and then all of a sudden I hit kind of that same plateau that a lot of patients hit. And I realized I wasn't able to get to end range of motion for the spine, which is something that's really critical for this treatment approach that I was using. And I realized there was a gap in the treatment protocol and the treatment process. And at that point, I thought, okay, how can I figure this out to make a product or figure out a solution to this? And that's where I came up with the Inverter Belt, which is a product that helps to get the spine into end range of motion, which is really where most of pain relief actually occurs as you're going through this treatment process called the McKenzie method. And so we went through that, and all of a sudden my pain kind of turned around, and I got to that 90-95% pain relief, and now I'm doing some exercises as maintenance, which many times people have to do, but my pain is pretty much gone, and it's a very common problem that that is associated with low back pain. So we feel like we've got a pretty good solution to a problem and a treatment gap that has been identified.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love it when people take action on something.
Yeah.
So how long have you had the Inverter Belt?
We have been selling the Inverter Belt since March 1st this year.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah, so it's relatively new. It's out in circulation about 100, 110 or so, I think, is what our mark is right now. And our primary market is really with physical therapists, because we want to really drive the product through the therapist who knows how to use the product, knows how to implement it with the patient, so that the patient doesn't maybe use the product inappropriately.
Good idea.
And we really want the product to be successful, and we want it to serve its purpose, which is healing patients.
Well, I checked out your Facebook page,
Sure.
and you got some pretty awesome reviews.
Yes.
On there.
Thus far we've had some good reviews. We've got a lot of good feedback from physical therapists that we've gotten the product out to early on, and we're starting to see some return in those areas as they're using it with their patients, and the patients are then also giving us good reviews. We've had good reviews on Amazon. We are selling through Amazon also.
Okay, great.
And so we're excited with the initial process. We've got a long ways to go, but like I said, it's one of those things where we're trying to just give a solution to a problem that if I can't solve as a physical therapist going through my own treatment process, how is the patient going to be able to do that? So,
right. So if people are interested in what the Inverter Belt is, they should check out your Facebook page or your website or both.
Yes, absolutely. We've got a YouTube page. We have our Facebook page. It gives all kinds of different blogs, all kinds of different videos. Our website has an ebook that actually will take you through an entire process of how to almost self-evaluate yourself. We are just now about ready to launch our first webinar, which will actually do the same thing, which will be about a 40-minute webinar or so. And then also we've just created our second webinar, which will be a webinar for physical therapists. We're really gearing our website towards both a clinical side and a patient side. So patients can get the information that they need to bridge that knowledge gap that exists, and then clinicians can be educated in terms of the benefits of the product and how it fits into research and evidence-based practice.
Okay. So at this point, people are only purchasing it from your business, wherever that may be, your website, Amazon, that sort of thing. But what about the clinicians? Are they selling it?
We have had several clinicians that have actually ordered 5, 10 units, and they're actually selling it as inventory as a medical durable piece of equipment. And so we're hoping to get more of those types of contracts. And that's our goal, is again to get it into the therapist so that they can administer it appropriately.
That's amazing.
Yeah, we're excited. We're very excited.
Well, I know when I fortunately have not suffered back pain, but I have some family members that have for decades.
Sure.
And I know how debilitating that can be and how much it affects the quality of life a person has when they, have back pain.
Absolutely.
Any kind of pain, but especially the back. Everything is, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Actually, back pain is at this point in time, it's the third most common reason why people will go to their PCPs. Okay.
PCP.
Primary care physician.
Okay.
It is, in terms of outpatient physical therapy rehab. Our rehab wouldn't exist without back pain. 50% of all of our patients are low back pain.
Wow.
It's actually becoming somewhat of an epidemic.
Okay.
The point prevalence is about 104 million individuals with low back pain at any given point in time. And about 32 million individuals in the United States alone are actually seeking medical help for low back pain.
Why?
So it's a huge problem.
Why do you think so many people have lower back pain?
I think it's a lot to do with our lifestyles. Number one is most people don't focus on their pain, and most people accept that they have pain. I think also most people, I tell this to patients all the time, very rarely does God just strike people down and say, you have pain, and you're just going to have pain. But really, most of our pain is driven by some of our habitual patterns, the things that we do within our life.
Or don't.
Or don't, yeah, exactly. And one of the most fascinating stats that's out there is that the average person will actually bend forward 3,500 times a day, okay?
No.
And a lot of that is actually associated with posture, okay? Because when we reach for a coffee cup, that's a bend, okay?
Oh, okay.
All right, so, and that's spinal flexion. And in respect to that, we will actually only overextend 100 times a day. So that's a staggering 35-to-1 ratio, okay? And when you really look at it that way, what that does is that creates an asymmetry in the spine, and it doesn't wear out the spine, it just makes it irritated. It's kind of like if you were to just tap your forearm here maybe 10 times a day. No big deal, right? But if you do that for a week and you do it 10,000 times a day, okay, all of a sudden when you just go to rub your forearm, that's going to hurt.
Right.
It's going to be sensitive, okay? And that's what happens when we overload the spine forward so much and we don't do enough repetitive extension or back bending to counteract that.
So you're making me really conscious of how I'm sitting right now.
Yeah,
So I'm just going to straighten up my back.
Usually when I have that conversation with people, they kind of get themselves up.
Squirm a little bit.
And I will be the first to admit that I don't do what I do, because I am just as guilty as everybody else. I have poor habits, poor posture. I actually suffer from some low back pain, as I mentioned earlier, and occasionally I'll start to feel some symptoms come on, and I'll have to really correct some of that. Yeah.
Right.
So
we were talking before this about as we age and how important it is to take care of ourselves.
Absolutely.
So, are there any tips you can provide people to prevent having lower back pain?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think one of the things is just awareness of where your spine is in space. One of the first pieces of education that I always give patients is, think about your spine in 3 different positions, okay? Flexion, bending forward, neutral, where the spine is, where you just kind of got this nice little reverse curvature. It's called a lordotic curve, and then obviously overextension. And so what you want to think about just in your daily activities, how much time do I really spend here versus here versus here, especially in a seated position? Because when you go back to that big ratio of 3,500 to only 100 times bending backwards, we can reduce a lot of that heavy flexion ratio by just staying in a better postural position. So that's number one, okay? And most people don't like hearing the fact that, oh, some of the pain is just related to habitual patterns like posture and I need to watch your posture. But there is a high correlation to that. It's not all about posture, but there are high correlations of that. Obviously, body mechanics when doing lifting, twisting, those types of things, maintaining a nice, good core strength, stability. That's always going to be something that's beneficial for people as they age. And then flexibility, hamstring length, making sure that our hamstrings are at a nice, good length, so that as we bend forward, we're not necessarily creating so much flexion in the spine, but some of the range of motion actually comes from the hips. So we counteract that a bit.
Okay, so let's talk about that hamstring thing again.
Sure.
What exactly do you mean by that?
Okay.
Because I don't think the average person, I'm like, what?
Okay, so hamstring length. Hamstring length is the muscle on the back side of the thigh. And when that becomes very tight, okay, what ends up happening, we all can reach down to the floor. But if we're not bending at the knees, when we're reaching down on the floor, we're going to get to the floor one way or the other. We're either going to do it through our range of motion in the lumbar spine, which creates more instability, shear forces, more wear and tear, more strain, more stress. Or if we've got better hamstring length, we can actually use some of that hamstring length when the hamstring is longer, by getting down on the floor using that versus all the mobility in the spine. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Kind of?
Kind of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I think one thing that's a trend right now is standing desks, which is, I have a hard time saying that word, but so like, would that help with lower back pain, or would that just make it worse?
Well,
standing.
It obviously depends on your dysfunction. There are some dysfunctions that people do worse in standing. For the average person, yes. But it also then still, comes down to how are you standing. If you're standing with your rear end out and leaning over the desk at a standing desk, well, that's not going to do much for you, because then you're still getting your spine into a flex position. But if you're standing up tall and you've got your proper ergonomics in a standing position, then it absolutely could do have some benefit for patients. But the real key is just not staying in static positions. So, if you have a standing desk, you still probably shouldn't stand all day. You're going to want to lower it down, get into a seated position, and change positions every 35, 40 minutes.
Really?
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
See, I have not been hearing that advice. Well, so that's good.
Think about it. The body just doesn't like to be overloaded in certain positions.
Yeah.
And that's usually what really starts to cause strain and stress. So if you can mix it up, people tend to do better.
Yeah, because I listen, I'm addicted to podcasts.
Sure.
And I listen to these, thought leaders, and they're like, oh, I have my standing desk and I haven't sat in years, and I think anything to the extreme could be dangerous.
And that's exactly it. There's a happy medium for everything. There are all kinds of theories out there and controversial topics that we could talk about in the physical therapy realm. But the truth is that most of this, there's a happy medium for all of it. It's usually not one all the way, and it's usually not the other. It's there's a blend in there that you need to kind of incorporate a lot of different thought patterns.
Okay, cool. So I see you brought a friend.
Yes.
Bring something else too?
Yes. Well, first,
I was hoping. I didn't see it, but okay.
Yep, this is the Inverter Belt. And you can see that it's very compact. It can be carried in a woman's purse. It can be a little cumbersome to put on originally. Once you've got the fit on there, it is very easy to put on and off once you've originally got it put together there. But it's compact and it's pretty easy to actually use. I did bring my spine here, because one of the things that I do like to talk to patients about is really the mechanics of the spine and how it works. And so we talked a little bit about the asymmetries in the spine and what it can create. And so I think talking about that and looking at what happens in the spine is always important, because if individuals have a rationale of what's going on, then they are probably more prone to be compliant with it and work with it. So looking at the spine in general, when we bend forward, what happens is we're looking at more of discogenic issues, meaning disc problems like a disc bulge, disc herniation, maybe a disc protrusion, those types of things. Okay, and so about 75% of the individuals with low back pain are going to come up with what we call a directional preference, meaning that they are either going to feel better when their spine's in a flex position or in an extended position. Okay?
Okay.
And so one of the first things that most people want to do when they're starting to identify kind of the patterns in their lives that bring on their symptoms is they're going to want to try to see, okay, do I feel better in a extended position, backwards? Do I feel better in a flex position? And the big test of that is, okay, are my symptoms worse when I'm standing because that naturally extends the spine, or are my symptoms worse when I'm seated because that's a naturally flex position? And so one of the big key things that we need to understand is that some of the anatomy. So you've got the vertebral bodies, which are the bony aspects here, and then you also have the disc that sits in between here. The disc is pliable in nature, and so based upon the pressure of the vertebral bodies above and below the disc, it's going to compress the disc and move it around. Okay, so different forces in the spine, whether we bend sideways, whether we bend forward, backwards, it's going to actually move that disc around. And by doing repetitive motions in one direction, it's going to start to displace that disc in different directions more so than others. Okay, and so with that repetitive flexion, that we talked about, that ratio, that huge 35-to-1 ratio. With that ratio, most people have a flexion type of dysfunction where they will compress the front end of the disc more, protruding the disc backwards. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that the disc has to have any damage to it. It just means that a lot of times there's a buildup in the back. Now, eventually there could be some structural damage that occurs, whether there's a little bit of radial tears in the disc or whether there's that bulging that we've talked about. Sometimes it's a common term is a slip disc. Okay, but usually what ends up happening is there's a buildup back here, and that starts to irritate this little nerve, and that makes
That's where the pain
comes in.
Okay.
Yes. So the disc does have some innervations to it, some small little nerve innervations. So you might have some minor pain if you're really starting to develop a little bit of a buildup in the back. But eventually that disc will probably, or that nerve will probably start to be irritated, and that's where we start to have some of that pain that occurs back here. And once that pain starts to occur, the muscles respond, they tighten up, more tone is created, everything gets bound down, we don't want to move. It's doing that to protect the spine, okay? And then the one thing that usually feels better in a long-term repetitious type of exercise program is extension to try to push that disc more forward again, okay? But unfortunately, right away, that hurts. So it's very counterintuitive.
Right.
So most patients, what they'll do is they'll actually feel a hair better in a flex position. It's making the dysfunction worse, but as they go to try to extend, they feel that immediate pain, and they say, well, that's not good. So they stay away from it, again, promoting the dysfunction.
Exactly why we need a physical therapist.
It's very counterproductive.
Make us do what our body really needs instead of what we feel needs to happen.
It's very counterintuitive, and that's what I tell everybody, that you've got to trust the process. And there's certain patterns of symptoms that we recognize as therapists. There's a couple of terms called centralization versus peripheralization. Not to get too technical, but essentially any type of symptoms that start to actually migrate towards the spine is a good symptom regardless of the intensity. As human beings, we judge most of our problems based upon intensity of pain, right? If it's really high, well, that's got to be bad. If it's really low, well, that's got to be bad. Or that's got to be good, I'm sorry. So centralization of symptoms is where the symptoms will actually migrate towards the spine, but a lot of times the intensity will raise. So you will say, well, that pain is worse, so I'm going to move myself into a different position. It's going to move away from the spine, which is designated as peripheralization of symptoms and can be is actually considered worse. Okay, but in your mind, you've just created a better reaction because the pain levels have lessened. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah.
It is. I just have to say how much I respect you guys that, have dedicated your lives to helping people with this. Like, it's not my area of strength. You know what I mean?
Sure.
No pun intended, but.
No, and thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
We enjoy what we do. Our goal is
helping people.
Yeah, and as we work with OSF. I work for OSF, and they did this lovely little personality exam, and almost all physical therapists are this blue personality, which is all about helping and trying to empower patients to get better and to teach. And so it's a passion, and it's something that we really enjoy, and hopefully we can continue to have an impact on.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, I'd love to talk just a little bit about how you went from being a physical therapist, you have a job with, your 9 to 5, so to speak, I know,
Sure.
And your benefits and all that, to thinking like an entrepreneur, because it is a completely different mindset.
Yes, it is. Yes.
So, like, what were you thinking when you made that transition?
Well, let's put it this way. When I first came up with the idea, I floated it by a few therapists, and they, their eyes kind of lit up, and they said, "Oh yeah, this is good. This has potential." And I thought, this was 4 or 5 years ago now, and I thought, "Oh gosh, we'll have this thing, out in 6 months, and we'll be ready to go." And it's significantly harder,
Right.
And I don't have a good business background. When we were in school training to become a therapist, most of the training is all biomechanics, anatomy, physiology, all of that sort of thing, and we do not have a big business section. So it has been eye-opening. I was really lucky back about this time last year. Jump Trading ended up sponsoring us to participate in Brave Launch, which is a startup workshop that we participated in I think it started in September last year. And I got kind of I call it a brain dump in terms of entrepreneurship and startup. And I got a lot of great information in terms of being able to validate what we were doing and work on some strategic planning and those types of things. But it's been a major challenge because, one, I don't have a lot of time. It's all in my spare time. I've got 2 small kids. Ellie, she's almost 6. Sam is 2.5, and still want to be a good father, still want to be a good family man to my wife.
Yeah.
And so it's been a challenge balancing that. I think that's another reason why it's been still continuing to work 40 hours a week. We haven't probably moved as quickly as long as what we would like to, but it's hard if you can see the big picture and if you can strategically put out the smaller steps in between and just have little victories here and there. That's kind of the way we've worked at it. So
Right.
Just putting small steps and achieving those and then moving on to the next ones.
Yeah. So you have a website.
Yes.
What's the name of your website?
Theinverterbelt.com.
Okay. And you have, I know, a Facebook page.
Yes, ma'am.
Called The Inverter Belt. Right?
Yes, I think it's actually, if you search the Inverter Belt, it should come up. I'm not sure what the actual name of the website is for Facebook.
Okay, I think it is.
Is it? Okay.
I'll put a link in later.
Okay.
But pretty sure that's what it is because
Okay.
I went and
I
checked
should
it out.
probably know that, right?
Yeah, it would be, not a bad idea. And then you said a YouTube channel is, what's the name of your YouTube channel?
The Inverter Belt system.
Okay, The Inverter Belt System.
Yes.
Okay. Any other social media that you use?
We are on Twitter. You can follow us on Twitter at the Inverter Belt System, and then we are also on Instagram also.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How's Instagram working for you so far?
What I found, I think, is that there are a lot of different programs out there where people automatically kind of like and follow and do all this. So I don't know if we've gotten a lot of return out of Instagram. Most of our return has come from our Facebook interactions.
I feel your pain.
Yeah.
But the thing about Instagram is they're owned by Facebook, and they're just now starting to make, things easier for advertising. So when you should go that direction, I think it's a good place to be, even if we haven't figured out all the bugs yet.
Yeah, the quirks of it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I get all these people who follow me just because I use hashtags like social marketing. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Not really who I'm looking for. Yeah. So I want to talk also for just a second, because we're just about done here, but about the name of the company is the Oakford Group.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I thought it was a cute story. Share that.
Yeah. So my grandparents are Judy and Art Oakford, and they're in their 80s at this point, and they're great people. They're wonderful people. They had 4 children, all girls, and so the girls all decided that to keep the Oakford name going, they were going to have the second born in each one of their families' middle name Oakford. And so my middle name, being the second born, is Andrew Oakford Champion. And my son's name is Samuel Oakford Champion. So it's kind of a montage to them, and kind of to keep the name going, I guess.
Yeah, and it's a great name.
Yeah.
It's strong.
There you go.
Boy, you got Andy Champion and Oakford. You just got the whole name thing going for you.
Oh, yeah, it's working nice.
Anyway. Well, Andy, this has been fascinating, and I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing with the Peoria audience
Absolutely.
like what you're doing. I think, kudos to you.
Thank you.
Keep it going. I'll help you in any way I can, sharing it with my friends.
And I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, it's been awesome. So thank you for watching. And, if you have someone that is suffering from lower back pain, or especially anybody who is a physical therapist, in your circle, if you wouldn't mind sharing this, with them, that would be awesome. And Andy's trying to do a great thing, is doing a great thing. So anyway, thank you, Andy, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next week.
Thanks.
PeoriaLife.com